All right, everyone. You've probably seen this. Have you noticed that they've carefully invented a dichotomy between conservatives and populists at this time? Like if you watch Fox News and they talk about the GOP primary candidates, they have those two columns. So populists, you've got Trump and Ramaswamy and they put DeSantis there for some reason, whatever. And then you've got like Haley and Scott and Pence, they're conservatives. If you're using the colloquial nouveau term for conservative, what you're really talking about is post-Reagan neocons. When Clinton came in and slam-a-jammed the Republicans, they decided to take their party more in that liberal direction, and they just became corporatists. So where before you had had an attempt to actually understand older populist economics, which actually are conservative, you threw that away in favor of just globalism, basically. And for some reason, that passes as conservatism by people who, in many cases, are old enough to remember actual conservatism, a la the atomic era. And if you go back much further, like look at the protest music from the 40s and shit, which I'm a big fan of, or the 50s to an extent. What is it? It's a bunch of hayseed fucking bluegrass music talking about hell bombs and stuff like that. Well, we're going to roast the world and things are going to hell. There's inflation. The government keeps not minding its business. That's because those people remembered a time at the turn of the 19th century and into the early 20th century where things were much more independent. People had more power to themselves and things still were going fine. There was still infrastructure. There were still strikes. There were still people doing what they wanted to do, and the advancement of society was actually far faster because you had more entrepreneurship and things. When the government gets out of the way, people say, hey, when I can do what I want, I feel like being more productive because it makes me more fucking money. But if you know that the government's just going to rob most of that money from you, there's a little bit less of an incentive, especially when the government has also carefully crafted politically connected monopolies like Google in order to prevent any countervailing entrepreneurship. This is the problem of our pharma industry, too. When Biden talks about no senior's going to have to pay more than $2,000 per month for their prescriptions, it's a hard cap, and you can take that to the bank and out behind the woodshed. That's wonderful. They wouldn't be paying that much if it weren't for the pharma monopoly. Right now, if I developed a cure for cancer, I can't market it. I can't produce it. Like if I distribute it, it'd be like Dallas Buyers Club. I'll get my neck breathed down me by the EPA, the FDA, the FBI, and the ATF at the same time. You know, one of the chemicals in my wonder drug just happens to be a precursor. So, you know, some heavily armed thugs might break in and destroy my laboratory apparatus at 4 a.m. You'd have to sell the patent to the pharma company. Then they can jack up prices because they've got a monopoly, because it's important to make sure that medicine is standardized. That's why they don't want to compete with the Canadian and Indian markets. Boy, oh boy, would they be fucked if you had to compete with the Dutch market too, by the way. The way the medical system in the Netherlands is not actually socialized medicine. And it's just a mythology, but people believe it because they've been fed bullshit by Bernie Sanders. Neocons should stop pretending to be conservative. Name me a thing they've conserved, other than their own wallets, their own income. Nothing. You failed to conserve the traditional family unit. You failed to keep communism out of the Western world. Now you say that it's a-okay with you. Well, everyone's got their opinions and stuff. You failed to protect freedom of expression. You certainly failed on the Second Amendment. The fucking court had to step in order to undo just some of the problems that the boomerist neocons created. You're not conservative. The populists are the conservatives. They're the ones that are actually fighting for the things that you lost about. You can say that that's lost causerism and it's retro, it's like throwback, and they're fighting a war that was already won decades ago, and it's a lost cause. Oh, okay, it'd be back black-pilled if you want. But they're actually the ones fighting for that. Now, that comes with a caveat that I don't always agree with them. Do I want to preserve Christian hegemony? I'm not a Christian. I think people should worship the way that they did at the dawn of the country before Roman ritualism ended up infecting all of your Protestant churches. There was a huge dust-up in the 19th century about that. Again, another cause that you fundamentally lost. The high church beat out the low church, and you took the book of prayer, the common book of prayer that you were using outside of the Orthodox Christian hegemony of ritualism and said, no, I'm going to use the KJV now. Yeah, that sounds perfectly fine. Well, we'll basically be Catholic light. We're going to use the same iconography that we've called papism and graven images for the last several hundred years, and we'll just start doing that because it's kind of comfy to have tapestries and colored windows and stuff. I wish that more people, more Christians, by the way, knew about the goddamn history of their own religion. They would be woken up very, very quickly. You should familiarize yourselves with high versus low church and then see about your Christian purity in the common era. Anyway, you're not conservative if you're a self-professed conservative at this point. You're not conserving anything. Saying, oh, well, we've got to run watered-down candidates to win, or we'll put somebody in there who has like one actually extreme element. So like a Tim Scott. His whole platform is Jesus. Other than that, it's a pretty typical, regular, average mainline, like a Pence platform. There's a real difference between the two for the most part. Like Pence, another great example. What's he conserving? The gun control that already exists, the attacks on free speech that already exist, the warmongering, they all want to conserve that. Boy, oh boy, Raytheon stock calling, insider trading is rife in Congress. No, the populists are the ones that are trying to get back to that original. If anything, when I look at Trump or Gates or something, I see more of the countercultural movement of the 40s and 50s against the rising hegemon of state power and world policing. The early wave, and we're not talking about the hippies here, we're talking about the original gangsters against nuclear proliferation. They were farmers. They were people that grew up, in many cases, they grew up in the Depression or before. Some of them remembered the 1910s, the 1900s, even the 1890s or 80s. They had relatives that fought in the Civil War that were still alive at the time. They were the ones protesting first. Not hippies, not acid users. No, they may have smoked a little pot now and then. No, these were good old boys chawing tobacco, and they just wanted to grow them crops. Goddamn government coming in here telling me what crops I can grow. They were the ones that lashed out first. Bunch of farmers, rednecks, and shit like that. Some fat trust fund hippie that went to Berkeley. Those people came 20 years fucking later. Some cases 30. And then they found heroin and crack and cocaine, and then the yuppies began. And now they lecture you not to use drugs, even though they did nothing but drugs back in the 1960s. I find that very funny. When people get old and they become fuddy-duddies, and so they were fucking all the time and doing drugs and getting wasted. But now they'll lecture, with a Marlboro in their mouth, they'll lecture some kid about not smoking. Don't do drugs, Jimmy. I already did all of them. There are none left. We used them all. Don't bother trying to find them. The streets are a little dry right now. Conservatives, self-professed, are not conservative. The real conservatives are the populists. They're yesteryear's conservatives. So the Republican Party as it should be. The populist movement as it ought to be, like an actual working movement that stands for individual liberty. Leave me the hell alone. It has libertarian overtones. And yet it also has quasi-nationalistic overtones. Which makes sense if you're going to be a nation state, but people are overlooking that fact now, aren't they? That's about all. Peace out.